Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Best-selling novelist John Irving returns with his first novel in 7 years, a ghost story, a love story, and a lifetime of sexual politics. It is The Last Chairlift. At Aspen, Colorado in 1941, Rachel Brewster is a slalom skier at the National Downhill and Slalom Championships. Little Ray, as she is called, finishes nowhere near the podium, but she manages to get pregnant. Back home in New England, Little Ray becomes a ski instructor. Her son Adam grows up in a family that defies conventions and evades questions concerning the eventful past. Years later, looking for answers, Adam will go to Aspen. In the Hotel Jerome, where he was conceived, Adam will meet some ghosts. In The Last Chairlift, there are many ghosts. John Irving has written some of the most acclaimed books of our time, among them The World According to Garp, A Widow for 1 Year, A Prayer for Owen Meany, and The Cider House Rules. It is a great pleasure to welcome John Irving to this week's book show. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thank you. It's nice to see you.
Wonderful to have you on the program. Let me begin with this, which is much has been made about the size, that this is your last long novel, this is your longest novel. I just keep on reading reviews of the book where it seems to be the focus of so much of this is the size of the book. I love it. I mean, give me, you probably don't want to hear this, but give me 1,200 pages, give me 1,300 pages. That's fine, because if the story is good and the story is lovely and beautiful, then what's wrong with that? Why do we seem as Americans to be leery of novels that are over 280 pages?
I don't think you should necessarily confuse Americans or readers of any nationality with professional book reviewers who have a lot to do. I'm not exaggerating. If you want to look back at every review I've received in the daily New York Times, I mean every one says each of the novels that's being reviewed is too long. Too long in the opinion of a professional book reviewer who has other things to read and a finite amount of time in which to write their reviews is not everyone's situation as a reader. What I say to my readers about my 15th and longest novel is, take your time. I did. And I do as a writer. I don't write quickly. I write slowly. I rewrite. I write by hand, in longhand, purposely to slow myself down. I don't believe that writing good fiction is fast work. If it's a good novel, you should read it slowly. So don't pay attention to people who whine about the length. I think this is my most ending-driven, my most plot-driven novel. And as you know, I am primarily, an ending-driven, plot-driven novelist. I write toward an ending that is predetermined. I know what it is. I'm going toward an objective, not just what happens, but in what tone of voice I am when you get to the end of the story. I think this is one of my best set up or best constructed endings. And you should not be in a hurry to get to the end of it.
The fact that this story takes place over 7 or 8 decades would indicate that it would be lengthy, right? Because it is this story, it's telling of Adam and this family and the backstory. And to get all of that in is lovely because we don't feel like we're missing anything about that story.
Thank you for that observation. I knew the novel would be long. I knew it was the longest novels among the ones that had been gathering notes, which was why I thought I ought to write it sooner rather than later. It's almost as long as David Copperfield, one of my favorite novels. It is shorter than David Copperfield, barely. It's a family situation, and the first-person narrator has a complicated family. I include his extended family as part of the family who loves him. And as you know, in his family, who are all queer, except for him, he's the only straight guy in his family. Everyone else in his family is queer, and he has a most loving and supportive family. When I say extended, I'm including his older cousin Nora and her girlfriend. Of course, Adam's mother and Adam's mother's girlfriend, and the man Adam's mother marries, who even before the wedding is suspected by hostile members of the family of being gay. In fact, this man, Adam's good stepfather, another one of my good stepfathers, all of my stepfathers are good, but this one, in my opinion, may be the best stepfather of them all. He transitions to female. He is a trans woman stepfather. So there are in Adam's life, looking after him, all these queer women who do an excellent job of looking after him. And I have to account in the course of Adam's long life for their long lives and their interconnected stories, because they go the distance, or as you know, almost the distance, without giving too much of the story away, with Adam. Hence, I am not only detailing 8 decades in my first-person narrator's life, but the 8 decades in the lives of this family of 5 who take very good care of him.
Knowing that you have the ending and you know where you're headed, it seems in this novel that you are really looking at some touch points, some real benchmarks in our society and in our history, and how these characters relate to them, whether that be the Reagan administration or certain films or the sexual politics of a particular time. And of course, more recently, the election of Donald Trump. You look at those moments while not being overtly political. You do look at those moments with these characters.
Well, I would say that those novels of mine which touch on the sexual politics of our time are essentially focused on sexual politics in 2 different but similar areas. Women's rights, which of course includes abortion rights, and LGBTQ rights. It's hard to imagine my naivete now, looking back on The World According to Garp. But when I was writing Garp in the 1970s, I actually imagined that the extremes of sexual intolerance I was writing about might even be passé, out of date, before I published the novel. It's a sexual assassination story. A feminist activist is murdered by a man who hates women. Her son is killed by a woman who hates men. The most sympathetic and compassionate character in the novel is a transgender woman. I needn't have worried. The discrimination against sexual differences and sexual minorities has never gone away. Look at the Republican legislators in so many states who are banning books in schools and libraries. Books on what subjects? On abortion and on anything to do with the LGBTQ community. What is the intention of banning books about the LGBTQ community in schools and libraries, other than to isolate those kids who are gay or lesbian or trans, to make them feel more lonely than they already feel. The cruelty of that sexual discrimination is still very much with us. And what are the principal political targets in the Last Chairlift? Republicans and the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. Well, if you look at those Republican justices who overturned Roe versus Wade, all but one of them is Catholic, and the one who isn't Catholic was raised Catholic. His mother worked in the Reagan administration, and she was a staunch anti-abortion activist. The overruling of Roe meant that those Republican justices are more in step with the Vatican than they are with the First Amendment of the US Constitution, that part that says, make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Well, that's what those justices did. That's what they did.
And of course, you're no stranger of writing about abortion with Cider House Rules, of course. And it is fascinating to me that in this novel, the choices that the characters have and how confident they are in their decisions. And I don't know that we often see that great confidence that comes with the decisions that these characters make in their choices. And it seems that it comes from acceptance of that family unit that you talked about.
I think that's very true. It was also, of course, my intention not only to make poor Adam the only straight member of his queer family. In Adam's family, he's the queer one, queer in the sense of odd or unusual or the last one not to know anything. Adam is the slowest learner. And I hope it won't be missed on readers that in this story, the straight guy is without question the most badly behaved sexually of any member of his family. I think it would be rather hard to miss that point, if any point might have been overstated. Just a little understatement has never been my thing. But we should talk about the ghosts, because while the ghosts aren't new in my fiction, there is the presence of a ghost that haunts a prayer for Owen Meany. There is an actual ghost among the characters in one person. This time they are, as you said at the beginning, a stronger presence, and they get stronger as the novel goes forward. As we get older, of course, there are more ghosts in our lives. More people we knew when they were alive are ghosts to us. I'm thinking, as a non-religious person, ghosts have always been, as far as I can credibly venture into the so-called spiritual world, I understand the credibility of ghosts. I don't want to give any of my ghosts away. I don't want to spoil the story, but I will mention the ghosts who are real. The Hotel Jerome in Aspen is a real hotel. Aspen has a real history. It was a silver mining town long before it was a ski resort. There are 3 ghosts in the Hotel Jerome who have been regularly cited by the guests who've stayed there more than once or twice, and by anyone who's worked at the hotel for more than a few years. They've usually seen 1 or 2 of them. They certainly are characters, minor characters in The Last Chairlift. They are a sobbing silver miner. He can often be sighted wandering the halls. A naked 10-year-old boy. And third and last, a former hotel maid. She fell through the ice in a local pond. She died of pneumonia, but she occasionally comes back to turn down the beds or tidy up the bathrooms. Without giving my story in The Last Chairlift away, I'll just say that my ghosts, the ghosts I've made up, I think will make more of a lasting impression than those three regular old ghosts in the Hotel Jerome.
John Irving is our guest on this week's book show. The new novel is The Last Chairlift. It is published by Simon & Schuster. About 5 years ago, I was lucky enough to give you an award for your Lifetime of Achievement from the New England Booksellers Association. And I was sitting at your table and you were starting to work on this novel, and you said, well, I can't talk too much about it, but I will say that it's a ghost story. And I believe I said, well, you've dealt with ghosts before, and you said yes, but these are much more prominent. They will be very prominent in the beginning, and they will be very prominent at the end. So as I was reading this novel, that's exactly what happens. And I was fascinated by that, because even though we see these moments that come in and out, those ghosts are almost introduced as a set of characters that are with us throughout the story.
True. They make their presence felt, I think, even among those characters who are not predisposed to see ghosts, who never see them. They also had an effect on me of a personal kind, and that could be seen in the many mutations of the title of this novel over the course of my writing it. It reminds me of what happened when I was writing the Cider House Rules. The working title of the Cider House Rules, all the while I was writing it, was The Boy Who Belonged to St. Cloud's. That became the title of the first chapter. It would have worked. It would have worked pretty well as the title of the novel, although if the novel had been called The Boy Who Belonged to St. Cloud's, I think it would have given too much of the story away. And I chose, rather than this very metaphorical title, what I call an actual title. The Cider House Rules are stupid. They're ignored. Nobody pays any attention to them. The people they're meant for can't even read them, but they're real. They're actual rules. Well, the original title of this ghost story, The Last Chairlift, was Darkness as a Bride. It would have worked. It wouldn't have been bad.
Shakespearean.
Yes. There's another title. It's the title of Act 2 in the novel, The Honeymoon on the Cliff. It would have worked too. And Act 3 in the novel is called Rules for Ghosts. That would have been okay for this novel. But all three of those titles are metaphorical. They're creepy, that's appropriate. They also, in my judgment, give a little too much of the story away. So I chose over those the actual one, The Last Chairlift. You don't even get to The Last Chairlift for 700 pages. But when you get there, I think it makes an impact. It's real. It has a real job, so to speak, in the story. In the novel, it's described as a hearse, a waiting hearse. Okay, it is. That's as much as I want to give away. But that progression in the course of writing a book from metaphorical to actual, it's happened to me before. And there's something a little ghostly about that progression itself.
A couple things in the time that we have left that I would like to get to. Of course, we have discussed on this show before with you about your love of the 19th century novel. There is a wonderful passage in The Last Chairlift that Adam's stepfather says, "If I drive off the road and am lying upside down in a ditch, unable to move my legs or get out of the car, I want to have something good to read, an emergency novel." Exeter's smallest English teacher explained. And we find then Adam saying, "I couldn't imagine how a story that begins in a graveyard about a lonely boy who is accosted by an escaped convict among the graves would become my emergency novel." That idea of an emergency novel is so fascinating to me because prior to this, I've always thought of Great Expectations to be the novel that I will often go to when I need to read a really good novel and to have that moment of fiction writing. What does that mean to you, of that emergency novel, and how your novels fit into that?
Well, the emergency novel part of The Last Chairlift is particularly autobiographical. I would say that the parts of my novels that are about writers as main characters or principal characters, when it comes to the writing, are the most autobiographical. Ruth Cole in A Widow for 1 Year, Garp in The World According to Garp, Juan Diego in the most recent novel, Avenue of Mysteries, all writers like Adam Brewster. There's no question, Joe, that Great Expectations is my emergency novel. It was not the first Dickens novel I read, but it was that novel, Great Expectations, that I read when I was 15, that determined for me that I would be a novelist. I wanted to be a novelist, like Charles Dickens, not just any novelist. I wanted to be a novelist like Dickens when I first read that book at the age of 15. I wasn't much older. I was 17 when I read Herman Melville's Moby Dick. That was the novel that showed me this is how you foreshadow an ending. This is how you signal to the reader that the writer knew what was going to happen exactly when he or she was beginning the story. You can't miss that in Moby Dick. Moby Dick is the most ending-driven novel I've read. Great Expectations is the one I fall back on, is the one that made me want to be a writer. And it was both a frightening experience, but a formative one, to know at the age of 15 that this is what I wanted to be. And not only a writer, but a writer like that. It had to be like that. Nothing contemporary moved me, affected me emotionally the way Dickens did and still does. So that I think it's unquestionable that the degree to which The Last Chairlift is an homage or written in tribute to Moby Dick, that's pretty clear. Moby Dick plays a role of its own in The Last Chairlift. But between Great Expectations and Moby Dick, there's no question that these novels serve that emergency purpose for me. I'm always looking for a passage in them. And when I go back to look for the exact line, the passage itself, it takes me back into the novel and I reread the whole thing again. I cannot count how many times I have been led back to Moby Dick or back to Great Expectations, looking for a small line, a small passage. And from that passage, I go back to the beginning and I start all over again.
But for you to know then that that is what you wanted to do, and that's the type of novel that you wanted to read, and then you're able to do it. I mean, that seems remarkable to me, and a great insight as to how driven you were to make the kind of art that you wanted to make.
Well, you have to be driven to spend your life as a writer, because you're committing yourself to being alone most of the day, every day. If you're lucky enough to be self-supporting as a writer, which didn't happen to me until the fourth book, The World According to Garp, my fourth novel, was my first bestseller. I had a full-time job doing other things other than writing for the writing of those first four novels. But when I became able to support myself by writing, it meant that I could write every day, all day. And I do. I consider it a great good fortune and a luxury. I don't have to be disciplined to do it. I had to be disciplined when I only had 2 hours a day to do it, and not every day. But it was a gift to be able to do it every day, 8 hours a day. And I don't take it for granted. I love it. I get to do full time the only thing I really loved avidly to do. But it is a commitment to being alone. I feel, I've said this to my wife and children many times in the course of the pandemic. I feel more than a little guilty that the pandemic, which has been so difficult for so many people, has not truly been very hard on me. Self-isolation comes pretty naturally to someone who spends every day, all day, writing a novel.
Again, John Irving's latest novel is The Last Chairlift. It is published by Simon & Schuster. We enjoy hearing from our listeners about our shows. You can email us at book@wamc.org. You can listen again to this or find past book shows via podcast or at wamc.org. Sarah LeDuc produces our program. Bookmark us for next week.